Canadian province of Ontario says it will slap a 25% surcharge on electricity exported to the U.S.
We read in Politico that Ontario Premier Doug Ford threatened to shut off his province's electricity exports to the United States.
For decades, Canada has been regarded as a stable and reliable economic partner in North America, largely due to its deep trade ties with the United States. However, the recent tariff crisis is beginning to expose cracks in this long-standing alliance. Canada's new Prime Minister, Mark Carney, has adopted a confrontational stance, shaking the foundations of Ottawa's relationship with Washington. On March 27, 2025, Carney made a bold declaration. The era of unquestioned closeness with the United States is over, while some dismiss it as mere political rhetoric. Subsequent actions suggest that Canada is prepared to back its words with concrete measures. Ottawa has hinted at leveraging its key economic assets, oil, gas, LNG, electricity, and the automotive industry, as strategic tools in response to U.S. tariffs. While many Canadians have rallied behind the sentiment, we will not back down, concerns are mounting south of the border. Could this escalating dispute lead to a full-blown trade and energy crisis, shaking North America to its core? Energy, the first front in the trade battle. Canada's energy sector is at the heart of the unfolding tensions. Recent data reveals that in 2024 alone, Canadian crude oil exports to the U.S. have passed $70 billion, accounting for nearly one-fifth of total U.S. oil imports. Additionally, Canada supplies approximately 9 billion cubic meters of LNG to the U.S. each year, forming a critical part of some states' energy consumption. In his March 27 speech, Prime Minister Carney did not mince words. We hold these trump cards because we have a neighbor who imposes unilateral tariffs on us. The same day, a statement in the Canadian Parliament suggested that Ottawa is exploring alternative markets for energy exports. Given the U.S.'s dependence on Canadian energy, analysts warned that any disruption in this trade could spell trouble for Washington. Electricity is another area of concern. Canada supplied approximately 65 terawatt-hours, TWH, of electricity to the U.S. in 2024, representing about 20% of power consumption in certain regions. Canadian hydroelectric power, generated in the cold northern regions, is sold at favorable rates to the U.S. However, speculation is rising over whether Canada could pull the plug in retaliation. On March 28th, an unnamed government official confirmed that Ottawa is reassessing all trade agreements, including those related to electricity. If Canada restricts power exports or imposes additional taxes, energy costs could surge in northern U.S. states and industrial cities dependent on Canadian electricity. The automotive industry, a high-stakes game. The U.S. and Canada share a deeply integrated automotive supply chain. In 2024, Canadian automotive and auto parts exports to the U.S. exceeded $30 billion. Conversely, many U.S.-made components are shipped to Canada for final assembly. Despite this interdependence, Prime Minister Carney has signaled that tariffs and supply chain reforms may be on the horizon. On March 28th, Ottawa abruptly revoked tax incentives for U.S. electric vehicle companies, fueling speculation that additional tariffs are in the works, potentially targeting major brands like Tesla. Industry experts warn that such measures would drive up production costs and increase vehicle prices for consumers. However, Ottawa remains firm in its stance. This is not our problem. It is a problem of those who initiated these tariffs. Agriculture, the next battleground. Agriculture is another sector where the two nations are closely linked. In 2024, U.S.-Canada agricultural trade was estimated at $45 billion, with key commodities including wheat, canola, meat, and dairy products. On March 27th, Prime Minister Carney hinted at potential new taxes on agricultural goods, stating, "They should not assume that our hand is weak in this sector." One of the most critical trade items is canola, with Canadian exports to the U.S. reaching $6 billion in 2024. If Ottawa imposes restrictions, U.S. markets could experience sharp price hikes. Moreover, disruptions in supply of Canadian animal feed could severely impact American livestock producers. In this escalating trade war, Carney's declaration, "We will not always be on a losing side," has resonated with many Canadians. However, Washington remains wary, with some media reports suggesting that further U.S. tariffs may be under consideration, and economic interdependence under strain. The numbers paint a striking picture of U.S.-Canada economic interdependence. In 2024, U.S. imports from Canada exceeded $460 billion, with oil, automobiles, and industrial goods making up the largest share. Additionally, Canada exports high-value manufactured products, not just raw materials. Any significant disruption in this trade would have consequences for both nations. On March 27th, Carney warned Washington, "This interdependence is too complex to be tested by unilateral tariffs." However, diplomatic negotiations have yet to yield a resolution. While U.S. officials insist on fair trade, no compromise has been reached on Canada's retaliatory measures. Looking beyond the U.S., Canada's global pivot, beyond the immediate trade tensions, Canada appears to be recalibrating its global trade strategy. On March 27th, Carney met with European leaders in France and the UK, discussing potential partnerships in energy and automotive manufacturing. European media quickly picked up on the shift, asking, "Is Canada stepping out of the U.S. shadow?" Carney's response was subtle but firm. "We are developing our own policy. If Canada deepens its ties with Europe and Asia, it could reduce its reliance on U.S. markets." Some analysts even speculate that joint Canada-Europe automotive ventures could challenge U.S. dominance in the sector. April 2nd, a turning point approaches. As of March 30th, 2025, the details of Canada's retaliatory measures, referred to as April 2nd retaliation, remain unclear. However, leaks from Ottawa suggest that new tariffs on automotive products, metals, and agricultural goods are imminent. In the energy sector, Canada is considering diversifying its export markets rather than abruptly cutting off supplies to the U.S. On March 27th, Carney made his position clear. "There is no partner we trust anymore." This statement has fueled widespread speculation about whether Canada will take drastic action, such as limiting energy exports. Meanwhile, U.S. officials remain cautious, with some admitting that provoking Canada may have been a strategic miscalculation. Diplomacy or trade war, the world watches. With the April 2nd deadline looming, many questions remain unanswered. Will Canada proceed with full-scale economic retaliation? How will Washington respond? And how will global markets react to this standoff? Prime Minister Carney has assured Canadians that in the short term, we may face difficulties, but in the long run, we will preserve our independence. While this stance is popular at home, some fear that an all-out trade war could cause lasting economic disruption. On March 29th, the White House stated, "We are considering all options to address unfair practices." Some reports suggest that Washington may impose even stricter tariffs in response to Canada's actions. However, Ottawa remains defiant, declaring, "We have more leverage than they think." Will diplomacy prevail at the last moment? Or are North America's two largest economies headed for a prolonged and damaging conflict? The stakes could not be higher, and the coming days will determine whether this crisis leads to resolution or an economic earthquake.